Ladies and gentlemen, the program is about to begin. Please take a moment to silence your mobile devices. We would like to remind you that food and drink are not permitted in the theater. Also, please note that photography and audio and video recording is prohibited. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shama Rahman, Marketing Manager for the New York Times live conversation series TimesTalks. For 20 years, TimesTalks has paired New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest creative minds from the fields of art, television, theater, social justice, politics, and music. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's conversation and musical performance with Grammy and Academy Award-winning producer T-Bone Burnett and Academy and Golden Globe-winning filmmaker Joel Coen. Burnett's new album, Acoustic Space, is the first full-length installment in the Invisible Light Trilogy and explores the idea that society has been subject to over a century of electronic programming, which is causing us to lose our ability to differentiate fact from fiction. Moderating tonight's event is John Perales, who has been the chief popular music critic at the New York Times since 1988, and recently wrote about T-Bone in a piece titled, T-Bone Burnett Wants to Make Music to Heal Shrinking Attention Spans. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, John Perales, and our special guests, T-Bone Burnett and Joel Coen.
Well, thank you all for being here. This looks like a live crowd. T-Bone, one of the things the interview I did with you had to compress an hour of sensei wisdom into a newspaper column. But one of the things you brought up that didn't make the cut, ended up on the cutting room floor, was the idea of music as a mood activator, which I thought is a great way to describe it. And Joel, you use music to activate moods. So T-Bone, let me ask you first, but I mean, has working with movies made you more aware of that aspect of music?
It has. You begin to explore characters rather than, you're not working as a singer-songwriter trying to express something you feel as much as you're trying to get inside the character and relate to the moment he's in. And it's freeing, really. I found working with film to be incredibly freeing.
Yeah, it's interesting because it can be a mood activator in a very specific way and in a general way. I mean, I think when you're using it in movies or thinking about it in connection with movies, because sometimes, I mean, in the specific way, it's, what the requirements of the scene are and what you want the audience to be feeling or what's going on with the character. But in a general way, certain kinds of music are the sort of spur or they're the spur for thinking about the movie in general as what kind of music you're thinking about in terms of the whole tone of the thing. So it can work that way too.
Well, I was going to ask you about Oh Brother, which it has music at its center, and it seems the tone of the music is inseparable from the pace of the movie and the tone of the movie. Did you have T-Bone in mind when you started doing that, or did you?
Yes. Yeah, we did. I think I can't remember the exact conversation, but I think we called T-Bone up and said, we're making a hillbilly version of the Odyssey, and we want to talk about the music. It's using old-timey music.
Right in my wheelhouse, by the way.
What's that? Yeah.
The Odyssey or the hillbilly?
Yeah, that's right. Homer and Jethro.
Homer and Jethro. So yeah, I mean, it was at the very center of it, and again, I think what we did was we had certain music in mind when we were writing it, and that was something that when we got together with T-Bone, he picked up on right away. But interestingly, one of the songs that was at the center of that was something that you had played for us on the previous movie that we'd made.
Right, what we were doing, we were looking for songs for our epic character, the Dude. And
I've heard of that guy.
and I thought Man of Constant Sorrow was a perfect song for that character. You know, nothing he would do would work out. And it's, of course, the same could be said for Ulysses Everett McGill as well. And it's certainly the tone, once again, the tone of Man of Constant Sorrow, and we were listening to the Stanley Brothers version of it. One of the things we found out when we started clearing that song for a license in the movie, there are 50 different licensed versions of Man of Constant Sorrow. So we had to pick one, or 49 other people, or 50 people would have sued us, you know. So we used the Stanley Brothers version, and it certainly fit. It fit Oh Brother, the tone of Oh Brother, much better, and it also led to the ending, the Angel Band, the
Right.
Stanley Brothers version of Angel Band at the end of the film.
And it had harmonies, Stanley
Yeah,
Brothers,
harmonies, yeah.
Yeah.
which you definitely needed. Did you? I mean, you seem to have a vast collection of old-timey songs in your brain.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
I mean, is that your foundation, do you think?
No, you know, my foundation was probably really like Begin the Beguine and the Ella Fitzgerald's songbook singing Rodgers and Hart and that stuff. That was the first stuff I got deeply into. And then I got into R&B and Jimmy Reed. Jimmy Reed meant everything to me for quite a long time. Still does, actually, you know. And then Hank Williams, and then deeper into bluegrass and all of that. And at the same time, I was into experimental music. I had a studio, and we were sampling and turning tapes around backwards. So it's all been part of the same thing to me. I mean, all of the great composers, Stravinsky and Mahler, all use folk music as the basis of their most adventurous compositions.
Well, there's also the economy of the songwriting, of old-timey songwriting. I mean, they tell a story in 10 words.
Yeah, well, there's a great book by, what's the cat's name? I'll think of it in a minute, called Country, the Twisted Roots of Rock and Roll. And he takes the song Blackjack Davy, which was Dylan did in the 60s, and Warren Smith did in the 50s, and the Carter family did in the 30s, and he takes it on back to Scotland, and he takes it back to Middle English, and he takes it back to Ovid, and it goes right back to Homer. And it's the story. It's Blackjack Davy is the story of a itinerant musician who passes through town and steals the Lord's lady and takes her off on the road with him, and it goes back to Orpheus and Eurydice, you know. So
That's
what's that
roots.
writer's name? He's the great. This is being 71, you know.
Wow. Joel, I mean, you did Oh Brother, you did Llewyn Davies. You go into musical worlds. Why musicians for your characters?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the first question you asked, because it's a very direct channel to emotion and mood and all of those other things which are sort of essential for storytelling and work in movies in really a unique way, because it's not like when you're listening to music in a movie. Obviously, it's not like the way you listen to it at home. It's a synthesis between what's happening musically and what's happening visually, and it's full of endless endless possibilities, but it's, for us, my brother and I think it's partly a default way of beginning to think about these things. But it's also, partly through, well, I would say, from the beginning, from the first movies that we did, we've had an interest in American vernacular music, American folk music. We used it in fact, that's how, partly how T-Bone and I met, because after Raising Arizona, he called me up, and I think he was amused by the fact that we'd been in the score of the movie playing Beethoven on a banjo.
Well, also, I love the fact that you played Willow Garden, which is a murder ballad, as a lullaby. I thought, that's hillbilly right there.
So yeah, I mean, I think there was an early connection to a certain kind of music that we both loved, and we've just been exploring different ways of doing things musically with that kind of music and other kinds of music since then.
I also thought it might be because musicians get into trouble a lot.
That's. I mean, in the case of doing Inside Llewyn Davis, I think we were more. That was a movie where we were specifically thinking about musicians. I mean, people who that's how they live and that's what they do, and that was, I think, more than anything else we've done. That was something that interested us there, and we wanted to collaborate with T-Bone from the very beginning on that. So,
that movie came, if I remember, you said to Ethan, okay, so a musician gets beaten up in the alley after a gig.
Yeah, what we said was we were sitting around and we thinking, it's just kind of spitballing different stories, and I said to Ethan, Dave Van Ronk gets beaten up outside of Gertie's Folk City in 1960 something. Where does that go?
Now we know it involves an orange cat. Do you think, I mean, both of you have really twisted genre. I mean, it seems like you take genres and then recontextualize them radically. I mean, is that what you think you're doing? I mean, is that one of your operating method?
Well, for me, not exactly. It's we think we're working in the genre.
We're not very good at it.
And yeah, I mean, that's partly facetious, but it's partly true. We're sort of, I guess, internalizing it our own way, and what comes out comes out. So, I mean, to a certain extent, yes, because in any movie or any story, if you're doing something that's generic, what you want to do to keep people where they know what the rules are, what the tropes are, what you want to do to keep people off balance is mess with those a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and that's just a storytelling thing, as opposed to sort of a conscious desire to recontextualize the genre.
Yeah. Well, speaking of off balance, T-Bone, let's talk about your new record, which is very. I spent a couple of days listening to it through headphones, and it's got a lot of strange acoustic spaces in it. It's very disorienting.
Well, yeah, acoustic space is a Marshall McLuhan term. It doesn't have to do with acoustic guitars. It has to do with McLuhan says in acoustic space, everywhere is the center and there is no border. So wherever you are is the middle. And the thing about acoustic space, visual space is the space of the predator. You look forward for the thing you want to eat. The predator's eyes go forward. Acoustic space is the space of the prey. And because when you're walking through the woods and a twig snaps behind you, you need to know that before the tiger jumps on your back, So it's the it's a completely different way of perceiving reality, and I think that's what we were doing with this. We were looking at a new way to create a sound, to create an acoustic space that wasn't familiar.
Well, it's definitely defamiliarized.
Good. We succeeded.
The album also talks a lot about both God and the devil and living in the machine.
We are perched. All of us are perched at this moment on the razor's edge. And there's a book I want to recommend to all of you called The Road to Unfreedom by Timothy Snyder. And he goes back in. Here, I'll just tell you really quickly, I'll summarize it really quickly what he's talking about, is that in the 19th century, as all of the empires of Europe began to crumble, the different states tried to become autonomous nation states. And that led to two incredible wars that taught those nation states that they actually weren't nation states, that the history, like England wanting to return to some kind of past where they were an autonomous nation state, is a delusion. England was an empire that went out and pillaged other countries and brought all the wealth back to England. But after those wars, the Europeans realized that they were going to have to integrate if they were going to survive as nations. And so that led to NATO and the EU, excuse me. And they tried to include Russia in that. And Russia was not able to adopt the rule of law, so they weren't able to join the EU. And so what they decided to do, they came up with their own concept, which is Eurasia. Have you all heard of Eurasia? Yeah, so that's their concept, is they intend to go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean and incorporate Europe into Russia without the rule of law. And so that's what you see them doing. They're carrying out an extraordinary behavioral modification, electronic programming campaign on the West to destabilize the West and to destroy the European Union and really all of our alliances. So now we see these alliances between the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia emerging, which are the three biggest oil producers, right? A completely crazy notion from 20 years ago. One would have said that's totally insane, and yet it's happening. So anyway, this book, I've just done a very bad job of relating it, but seriously, it's the most sane thing I've read, and it goes back to 850 when Valdemar of Kiev converted to Christianity and started Rus, which is an imaginary Russia. I don't know. Anyway, that's a good book.
Speaking of electronic experiments, T-Bone, you just addressed all of the techies at South by Southwest who were all sitting there waiting for their IPOs to go public and venture capitalists to buy them out. And instead you told them, your safe harbor is destroying us.
Well, yeah, it is. There's a clause in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998, I think it was, called the Safe Harbor Clause, which is a liability shield for all of these internet companies, which says they're not responsible for whatever content the public posts on their platforms. And they say they're not media companies, they're only platforms, and yet they call what they do social media, So social media are media. They are media companies, and they need to be responsible just as the New York Times is responsible for what they print. You can do better than that. Come on. I think there's a growing. 10 years ago, I made those same remarks at the Future of Music conference in Washington, D.C., which now I've learned was a Google-sponsored, it was Google's version of the future of music. And they're not creating any music. They're just a platform, right? So why, but at any rate, people tried to shout me down, and they would say, well, you're just an old man saying, hey, kids, get off our lawn. And I would say, well, no, actually, I'm saying, kids, you're welcome to come play on my lawn. It's beautiful. There's grass and trees and birds, and it's analog, and it's nice. It's, you'll have a good time there. So that's not what I'm saying, But now, in Austin, which is a tech hub, there was no disagreement with those remarks, and it's because people now, I think, in general, the musicians were the canary in the coal mine. Our property was confiscated, and vast fortunes were made off our property without us being compensated. Well, now everybody's realized with the Cambridge Analytica breach and all the other breaches that have been exposed in the last several years, all of our personal information, all of our data are being confiscated, and there's a tremendous amount of money made from them in a new economic system called surveillance capitalism. Shoshana Zuboff has termed it surveillance capitalism. Another great book, by the way, by Shoshana Zuboff.
T-Bone Book Club.
Yeah, I am. I'm turning my website into a drudge report, a pro-humanity drudge report.
You've been doing True Detective too, which you said has been getting you into Ambience. And I want to ask you too, Joel. I mean, music that's not songs in films. I sometimes think of it as, my technical term for it is the TikTok music, which like there's usually a lot of ticking and talking in suspense movies, in chase movies, and
right.
Well, it's interesting, 'cause that's interesting to me, and it's also interesting to me in connection with T-Bone's music that he's making now, because one of the things that people don't credit in terms of being music and acting musically, acting on the listener or the audience musically, is the closeness of certain kinds of oral effects, what people would call sound effects or oral effects, to the possibilities of music. So for instance, and that's something that I got strongly in the mix of what T-Bone was doing on his new record. And one of the movies we made, which is No Country for Old Men, we looked at the movie when it was done, and we were thinking about the score, and then we were thinking, well, no, we shouldn't have a score. But in fact, there is a little bit of score in that. It's just so close to sound effect that people don't really notice it as score or music, but it's actually music that was written for the movie, but it's folded into everything else that's happening orally in the movie. So.
Well, that score was part of the inspiration for the I've Always Been a Man Without a Country song. It ends with like 3 or 4 minutes of what sounds like the score from No Country for Old Men, right?
Yeah. I mean, actually, yes, and that makes sense to me. And one of the strange, actually having done that and having sort of no music that sort of, I think people would recognize the score, we then got to the end credits of the movie, which usually has score on it. And we asked Carter, we said, well, okay, now you have to write something for this. And he said, in what context? I mean, there was no, there was nothing, there was no context for it. But he did come up with something very, very interesting, which is that, again, he took, in the last scene of the movie, you hear a ticking clock. And he took the rhythm of the ticking clock to start a rhythm, a percussion, and that then gradually built into something more recognizable as music. to score the end credits, but making it feel like it was naturally growing out of the movie.
I mean, do you think about physiological and psychological effects? I mean, a lot of dance music is 120 beats per minute, which is a peppy little pulse, and gets your heart beating in sync with it. I would think that quieter ambient music is also acting on our physiologies in some way.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. One of the things as we started experimenting with this music, because it's part of our ambition, I guess you would say, with this music was to give people space to just sit, relax into pure sound without having any stimulation, because our attention spans are all being decimated. I think I read recently that the average attention span now is under 3 seconds.
Whoa.
How do you create the Louvre in under 3 seconds? You know?
Well, yeah, it's also bad news for feature films.
Yeah. So we were looking for ways to open space up without any stimulation, with something that just entered you subliminally, as the score did in No Country for Old Men. I mean, I was very impressed with that score because really it just sounded like the wind. It sounded like part of West Texas.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we're trying to do with this music. And I find it incredibly relaxing. That's why I use this stuff, because it's relaxing. It's Palo Santo wood. You know, it's an ancient Peruvian. It's the hardest wood in the world, and it dies. And it lays on the ground for 7 years, and it goes through an alchemical change. And Marcus Mumford had been having headaches for months, and I gave him some of this, and he used it, and he knocked out his headache in the studio when we were working on Llewyn Davis, and he's used it ever since. 3 times I've had it knock out headaches, migraines in the studio, and also the musicians all are breathing the same scent. It knits us all together in some kind of communion. So we were looking for music that could be communion, really, you know. And I played it for Lenny Waronker the other night, who was my mentor. Lenny, I don't know if you've ever heard of Lenny Waronker, but he was one of the great producers and probably the greatest, West Coast record executive ever. And he listened to the whole album with his eyes closed in front of the speakers, and then he said, "It's weirdly relaxing, you know, for as disturbing as all the subject matter seems to be. It's actually relaxing," and that's what I've been looking for, a way to relax into sound, into meaning.
But with that 3-second attention span.
What?
With that 3-second attention span.
Yeah, well, you know, let's counteract that. Let's stop. You know, I had a dream. We were talking about this. I had a recurring nightmare when I was a kid, that we were in the parish hall of my Episcopal church, and we were all lined up along the wall, and at the far end were these men dressed all in black, and I couldn't see their faces, but I knew they were people of authority, and I knew they were dangerous, and they were removing everyone's right hand and replacing it with an electronic right hand that would be their new control mechanism. And I would wake up with a start and a cold sweat. And then several years ago, I walked in and I realized, oh, they just put it in our hands. They didn't have to. and this is actually what's happened. You know, this is causing us not to be able to think anymore. This extraordinarily powerful technology that was supposed to connect us all is actually disconnecting us all. And there's a doctrine in science, there's been a doctrine for centuries, I suppose, decades at least, of ethical neutrality, which led to the atom bomb, among other things. And it's past time for scientists not to duck value judgments, because there are dual use technologies in artificial intelligence that are the end of the human race without a doubt. And they're going to have to decide that some of these technologies that can be used for good and evil will not be developed because the good is not enough to outweigh the evil, because we can see it's the boys from Brazil, right? We can see what happens. This technology could create thousands of Einsteins, or it could create 1 million Hitlers, you know? And this is the danger we're in right now. The thing is, when a human being reads a book, he doesn't copy the book onto his brain. He absorbs the book, he gains knowledge from the book. We use our intuition, we use our instincts, we use our experience to process the book and gain knowledge from it. When a machine reads a book, it just copies it. And we have to be very careful how do you say this? Anthropomorphizing machines. Because they call it machine learning. It's not machine learning, it's machine copying. And we're very close to surrendering to these machines, I'm afraid. However, through knowledge, through talking about this, and through knowledge, we can control them rather than letting them control us. It's a battle we started long ago with musicians when there was Pro Tools and there was auto-tuning, and you could have anybody come in and speak a sentence and you could tune it to a melody, you know? And that's the machine beginning to play the human. And it's been destructive to music.
Well, I don't know. The way I sing it would be an improvement.
If what?
The way I sing it would be an improvement. It'd be auto-tuned.
Well, but see, that's not really. But yes, I understand what you're saying.
Well, I mean, do you use Pro Tools? Do you use those toys?
Yeah. I use all of the technology. I'm a technology. I sound like I'm anti-technology, but a microphone is technology. It's high technology, in fact, you know. And I've been using technology my entire life. A piano, a guitar is technology. It's all part of technology. But it's important that they're our tools and we're not its tools.
Yeah, I mean, there is also, in a very broad way, there's a way in which a part of what T-Bone is talking about is, and we both are in art forms that are essentially technological art forms, especially movies. I mean, but the other thing that, I mean, from my perspective, what it's doing is it's incredibly isolating. And I use all the technology also, but what's depressing is when what you do gets seen on smaller, ever diminishing platforms, and when it gets seen by ever diminishing groups of people down to one. So you take the community experience of enjoying those things as part of what the march of technology is in certain ways. It's an insidious part of what's happening with technology in movies, for instance.
And it's isolating people politically. It's isolating people socially.
Yeah.
I mean, a movie camera is technology, right? And, you know, one of the things I think the Oscars have to stop doing is they have to stop talking about the magic of movies. You know, they've been hawking this magic of movies for 70 years, and that was magic 70 years ago. Everybody would see a movie and have the same sort of response. You know, the mirror in front of the indigenous person or the cigarette lighter would, you know, it would be a shock, but it's no longer a shock, and maybe we could go deeper than the magic of movies now, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's all tied up in a lot of different, in movies what's happening technologically is all tied up in a lot of different issues. One of the things is that essentially every movie now is an animated movie, because what is gone is from the point of view, and they're right, the audience's point of view, they know it, is that what they're seeing is not actually photography. in the sense that that occurred in front of a camera at a given moment. Everything is touched. So every shot, we just did a movie that's a Western, shooting it out, it's about people in covered wagons and, blah, blah, blah. And there were 800 visual effects shots in that movie. You do any movie now, and everything gets manipulated. So in the old days, I remember in the first movie that we did, we had a shot where the camera was like a bumper-mounted camera. It's driving down the road. It's the point of view of somebody inside a car. And just serendipitously, the car, as we were shooting it, scared a huge flock of birds that were on the right-hand side of the road up. They go past the camera, and the sun's over here on the left. So a second later, their shadow of those birds just sweeps the road in front of me. It was really beautiful. And you watch that and you go, that just happened to happen. There was a camera there recording it at the time. It's child's play now to make that happen if you want it to happen. You just have to have the idea, and you can do that as a visual effect very easily. And I think people know that, and that's the sense in which everything's animated now. Everything's a cartoon, because it's that sense of the reality of photography, especially in the movies, is gone away.
Yeah, I mean, and with auto-tune and whatever, the sense that somebody's actually straining to sing that note disappears.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to any of this. I don't mean to, I don't want to go back to, I don't want to make America great again or anything like that. But yeah, we have, Jacques Ellul asked the question in 1960, or he made the statement in 1960, with every technological advance, we have to ask whether it furthers humanity or lessens humanity. And that's an incredibly important question for every day now.
Especially for artists.
Yeah, absolutely.
But on the other hand, I mean, recording was always an illusion. Film was always an illusion.
Right. Yeah. And also, it's a shifting equation, because there are things that there's and ways of doing things that there's no way I would want to go back to it. It's
You don't want to be in the editing room with a razor blade.
No, I don't. Even though there was something, editing used to be a very sensual and tactile experience. It's very sterile now, because it's all done on computers. It used to be you lift the rolls and cut it, and no, I spent 20 years doing that. And the part of it that I miss is the tactile part of it, that you were actually on machines that were kind of like musical instruments. They had a rhythm,
Yeah, that's right.
As the film goes through the gate, and you could feel like this, you knew, well, this was about, you knew what that meant in terms of time, holding a piece of film. So that's all gone. But okay, fine. I'm glad it's gone in a way, because there's so much that's come with technology now that frees you to do so many different things that you weren't able to do before. So it's a trade-off. It's always
for music and film, this digital editing is 1,000 times better, because in the old days you would create a piece of music to a piece of film, and if the editor removed one frame, the music would then be out of time. So so now you can shrink the music a frame, and it all remains in time, and it doesn't give you that trip. When music comes out of time, it trips you. It draws attention to itself, which is really the last thing you want in a film, is music to draw attention to itself. Unless it's a film about music.
When you do a score like that, do you have to take yourself out of the equation? I mean, do you have to think, oh, I could do this really clever thing, but I won't?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, probably being Clever is probably never a good idea.
Yeah.
But you record with people who can sing and play usually.
That's what I like the most. I mean, the most fun for me of anything is going into a great recording space with musicians and singers all doing it at once and have it, they play the song and they all come in and they go, yeah, that's it. You know, rather than constructing it, it all blends in the room. And when that's happening a lot of times, I just walk out into the room and I walk around until I can hear everything. And then I just stay there until I hear it be finished, you know. And there's something about that that's much more real than putting down a drum beat, putting down a clock, and then putting down an instrument that plays along with the clock, et cetera, you know, and 3 weeks later or 3 hours later or whatever it is, you have a song or a piece of music. But there's not the thrill of it. There's not the thrill of creation that there is when it all. There was a Greg Allman record we made called Low Country Blues, and there were 15 musicians and Greg all going at it, getting after it at once, and it was thrilling. You know, it's the same experience one gets at a concert, except it's much more intimate. It's, you know, you're right in the middle of it.
I mean, it's a social experience too if the musicians are playing together.
Yeah.
It's more of a erector set construction experience if you're doing stacking up tracks.
And the way music blends, the way overtones create other rhythms and other tones. The most interesting part of music, to me at this point at least, is the overtone structure. And you can't, when you record things separately, you don't get the same interaction between the instruments where other rhythms and other tones are set up, and all this wild, uncontrollable music happens, you know.
Acoustic Space.
That's right.
We can do some audience question and answers. I think some hardworking people are going to be in the aisles with microphones, and you could line up, but please make them really short so we can get a lot in. And I will try and shield my eyes so I can see you if you come up there. So T-Bone, what's your next project?
Well, I'm still working on the second edition of Acoustic Space.
Oh yeah, talk about that, because there's two more.
Yeah, there are 2 more coming. So far, we've recorded 3, and the second one's called Spells. And we go deep into the world of spells.
This is not about spell checking.
No, it's not about that. It's about Darren Brown. You know, do you know that you've seen this cat, Darren Brown? He's an amazing cat. There's another tip for you. Check out Darren Brown.
Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the chance to ask a question. I'm a big fan of Westerns, so True Grit was was a thrill to watch, not only for the performances, but also for the music. And it reminded me, because there's a religious song that you used throughout the film, and it reminded me of the Ballad of High Noon and the use of Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, which was the opening theme, but also repeated throughout the film, and it became a very emotional moment, and it actually foreshadowed the idea that Grace Kelly wasn't going to leave, and when Gregory Peck and so forth. So my question was, is that something that influences you, in your use of music, that the mood and the repetition? Because it became it seemed to me to be something ingrained in the film.
Yeah, you're talking about in the Tex Ritter song?
Yeah, the Tex Ritter version of the song of High Noon, right?
Well, certainly repetition is a fundamental tool of movie scoring and orchestrating the melody in a different way for different kinds of scenes, and it's a powerful tool. It has a powerful effect because you sit with the music, and it's like assimilating a record album. You know what I mean? You get the second time you hear it, and the third time you hear it, and all of a sudden you start to get the music works on you in a much more different, more powerfully and emotional way. It can be overused and then it gets repetitive. And sometimes you don't want to use it at all. But in the case of Buster Scruggs, yes, we did take, for instance, in the sequence with Tom Waits, he's singing Mother McCree, and Mother McCree is the score, as the big orchestral score. So you hear it, and then you hear it in iteration and a reiteration, and it's used. That's how a lot of movie scores work. I don't know if we used it anywhere else in the movie, but oh yeah, well there was actually, which is we start the movie with the streets of Laredo, which is familiar to almost everyone, and you don't really hear it again until Brendan Gleeson sings it at the end of the movie. And we like the way that kind of bookended the movie. And it had and of course, it's a powerful song. It's a very elegiac song. And that was part of what we were going for in the film.
Yeah, I mean, it can give you a kind of subliminal coherence, too.
Yeah, so subliminal coherence. In fact, one of the questions that we had with Carter when we were doing the score was, the big question was, are each of these sequences individual scores, or are they the same score? It was the same issue we talked with Bruno Del Bonell, the cinematographer. Do they all have their individual look, or do we want a uniform look? And we decided that they were all individual scores, but as you say, we wanted to subliminally knit them together and unify them somehow, and that's how we used the streets of Laredo.
Go ahead.
Gentlemen, first I want to thank you for the work that you do. My father's from Hobbs, New Mexico. I'm from Odessa, Texas. And having the ability to see some of the artists that I admire from a musical standpoint, and also some of the scenery from your films that I grew up around was very inspirational for me. Simply from the perspective of typically we don't have a voice on this global scale. So I wanted to know, from your perspective, Mr. Burnett, how do you find diamonds in the rough like Ryan Bingham?
How I find what? Sorry.
What's that?
How I find what?
How do you find diamonds in the rough like gentlemen like Ryan Bingham to choose to collaborate with?
I'm lucky, really. It's the truth. He showed up. Henry Miller said, we would all be much better off if we just took care of the things that are right under our noses. And I've operated under that theory that here's Ryan Bingham. He comes in with a song called The Weary Kind. And I said to Scott Cooper, this movie should be called The Weary Kind. Why are we calling it Crazy Heart? Weary Kind is a much more classic movie title. And just last year, Scott, and he said, no, I don't think so. And then last year he came and said, I should have called that movie Weary Kind. but really, that's it. And I do a lot of research. I love research. And I love history. So it's just work and really following the thing you love, following the thing that you think is beautiful.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh no. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, this is so nervous. I'm sweating, heart beating. Okay. So for my career project in school this year, I decided to do film directing and writing. And a lot of your movies really inspired me. Do you have any advice I could, any good advice for people my age, maybe wanting to take part of this career?
Keep writing. The writing part of it's really important. And that's what it all comes from. And that's also what gives you power in every sense, both creatively and economically, everything. It sort of all comes from that. So the writing is good.
So you're saying concentrate on the script.
Yeah, and that's a great, and that also is where the ideas for what you're going to do visually come from, and how you're going to And it doesn't matter, it's just in understanding what that is understanding things dramaturgically comes from having to work through those problems of writing.
Thank you.
Much shorter than I thought. So to continue with what you just said about writing, and we've talked a lot about how what's happening in the world and the books you read and all of that makes its way into your creative process. And you, sir, have talked about breaking genres, but not really, and you've talked about the communion of musicians. But where in this process does the awareness of an audience kick in? I mean, I guess I'm asking, do you have a person in mind when you're writing a song or when you're writing a story that you're writing that for, or a group of people in mind?
Yeah, I think yes and no. You know, I think you got the. Yip Harburg said that a songwriter, speaking specifically about songwriting, has to accept responsibility for the ideas he lets fly into the culture. That songs are very powerful. They get into us subliminally, and they program us. And so yes, you're thinking of the responsibility you have to a person, which is every person. You know, there's not a specific person, but just a person. Yeah.
You have an ideal viewer?
Well, I know I'm with T-Bone. Yeah, it's not, I think you think about the generic audience. You're not thinking about a specific audience. You're thinking about, you're doing it for someone to respond to listen to, or to see. You're not doing it just for yourself. But there's a paradox, which is that the things you do are really, at least the things that we do, the movies we do, are movies that we'd like to see ourselves, that are going to give us enjoyment. And then further paradox of that, of course, is that after making it and having worked on it for 2 years, you actually can't see it.
Do you go back and look at them and think all the mistakes you made? Or?
Well, if you actually do, that's all you think, right? But in fact, you can't see it like an audience member ever. It's impossible. But yes, if you try and it's a big mistake, then all you see is the mistakes you made.
And you have to be careful not to end up pandering, because that can happen. A lot of music panders to the audience now, and a lot of times it panders to the lowest instincts of the audience, and that's not doing anybody any favors. You know.
Go ahead.
Oh, hi. This is a question for T-Bone. So I'm very interested. I've been a little obsessed with the new Basement Tapes documentary. I've loved it, and others. And also, I wanted to have a sense of how you process your collaboration with the musicians as a producer. I would watch it completely uncut with 100% attention. But I'm interested in how they affect you as well as how you affect them. And I'm thinking in terms of that, the new Basement Tape, some of the themes you've talked about. I've seen Jim James, for instance, kind of go off with some of those same themes and interesting acoustics that he's been using since that time. I'm wondering if there was anything there.
Well, that particular event was that Bob Dylan had a box of lyrics that he had had sitting around since 1967, when he was doing the Basement Tapes, the first, what became known as the first Basement Tapes. And the idea was, if he wanted to turn them into songs, and it seemed the way to do it was sort of to recreate his method, which was he got with a bunch of interesting musicians, all of which were capable of being sidemen, really. I mean, lead frontmen. You know, every one of those guys sang or was a lead musician. So we went out and found some interesting lead musicians whom I had worked with before. I'd
Wonderful
worked with all of them.
musicians.
And I knew they were all collaborative. And I knew they all wouldn't get into competition, because that would be the death of a project like that. If I want this one and you can't have it, you know, any of that stuff would destroy that. So I'll say too, I've learned more about collaboration from the Coen brothers than I have from anyone else, because I don't know what, their relationship is so easy, and they have the ability to reach a consensus with such grace, and they involve everyone else in the process in that consensus building. And that's, you know, so I've tried to follow, I'm with them, you know, I try to follow their
I mean, I would imagine it's full of surprises all the time.
Well, of course it is, yeah.
Right.
You don't set off saying I'm going to discover, you know, America. You set off to discover America, and you find your backyard or whatever. You know.
Can you guys talk a little bit about, both of you, about your encounter with that great prophet of techno-essentialist crisis that we're in right now, John Hartford, and how you collide? Prophet of so many other things, but also of exactly that.
That's great.
Hartford. Well, if I can start.
Do it. Get at it.
T-Bone, one of the great couple of days of my life was T-Bone, before we started No Country, going to Nashville and just, I don't know where we were, in some big room over a studio, I think
Before Oh Brother.
Yeah, I mean, Oh Brother. We were in some big room over a studio in Nashville, full of fabulous musicians, just there to play and listen for 2 days. And Hartford coming over at one point and playing Bonaparte's Retreat. He was playing the fiddle then. And just, yeah, it was mind-blowing. 2000?
2000.
Yeah. And then, of course, we wanted John to be in the movie, but that was at a point, I think, where he was just he was ill. He
was pretty
sick.
sick.
Yeah, he was pretty sick. So we wanted him to play a part in the movie, a small part in the movie, and he couldn't do it. But yeah.
But there was a concert at the Ryman Auditorium that we threw after the film was shot. And we asked Hartford to MC it, and he rose to the occasion for that one night.
Yeah.
He was almost dead sitting in the dressing room, in Roy Acuff's dressing room, not right next to the stage. You know, and Emmy Lou came in and started talking about baseball and then singing, and then Gillian Welch came in and you could see his spirits lift. And when we started the show, there was no one in the audience. I mean, not when we started it, but 30 minutes before the show, there was no one there. And then suddenly it was like the locusts descended on the place, and it filled up in about 10 minutes. Yeah. And Hartford was very down because he thought, it was more like, this music's over and my life is over. It felt like that. And it just I saw him rise from the grave almost, you know. And he was the spark behind that whole concert. And everybody, I think, really, the fact that he rose to the occasion like that, everyone else rose in support of him.
Yeah, he
was the spiritual father of that whole movement.
Yeah, no, that's true. Really, he was a very, very generous soul, Hartford.
And a great songwriter.
He was a great songwriter, that's right.
Yeah. Speaking of songs, we get to hear some.
Is it time?
The time has come, I think.
Thank you. Can you have some more water?
What?
Can you just get him to send me some water out?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, here it is. Never mind. Yeah. Thank you. Let me have a sip of this. So I'm writing a musical with Marshall Brickman, and I'm going to play a couple of songs from that tonight. And this first one's called Everything and Nothing. It's a musical about the people who played Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. And the people who played them had much more interesting lives than the people they played, you know. Everybody wants to know the truth, but nobody wants to hear it. Everybody has to face the end, but nobody wants to get near it. Everybody wants peace, but nobody wants to surrender. Everyone lives in the past, but nobody seems to remember. There is nothing as long as never. As everything burns, it grows cold. Everybody wants to live forever, but nobody wants to get old. Everybody wants to be forgiven, but nobody wants to confess. Everyone longs to hold on to a moment that no one can ever possess. Everyone wants to be free, but no one can pay the price. Everyone wants to be heard when no one has asked for advice. There is nothing as long as never. As everything burns, it grows cold. Everybody wants to live forever, but nobody wants to get old. Nobody knows the end of the story. We must wait for it to unfold. Everyone lives under memento mori, but nobody wants to get old. Nobody wants to get old. Thank you. Well, I'm going to bring out a couple of my great friends right now. And, well, I'll start with one of the truly great guitarists and record makers of our time right now. Please welcome John Leventhal. And please welcome one of the great songwriters, and we're going to do a song we wrote together, Rosanne Cash.
Waking up is harder than it seems. Wandering through these empty rooms of dusty books and quiet dreams. Pictures on the mantle speak your name softly like forgotten tunes, just outside the sound of pain. Work me like a locks and broken codes. You cannot take that from me. My small reprieves, your heart of gold. Work me like a battlefield, locked inside a holy war. Your love and my due diligence, the only thing worth fighting for. Change will come to those who have no fear. But I'm not her, you never were the kind who kept a rule book near. What I said was never what I meant. Now you see my world in flames, my shadow songs, my deep regrets. Learn me like a pair of thieves with tumbled locks and broken codes. You cannot take that from me. My small reprieves, your heart of gold. Work me like a battlefield, locked inside a holy war. Your love and my due diligence, the only thing worth fighting for. Fighting for. Fighting for. I have to say that T-Bone called me up and he said, will you write the lyrics for a narco ballad where there's a lot of destruction? I said, yeah, that's my wheelhouse, man.
So let's see. Yeah, so this is a song called Out of Nowhere, also from the musical. I think this is the last song we'll play tonight, and we'll try. This is our first rehearsal, so I hope hope we can get through it. There is no end to this road we travel. No conclusion is foregone. Once you define a thing, you lose it, but it keeps you moving on. No battle that can be won is worth fighting. There is no place to run but between the lightning. No grievous talisman, no spectre frightening can stop the wind from blowing. Can't stop the river flowing. Can't stop the world from turning. Can't stop the sun from burning. So I'm never gonna quit for when you're not expecting it. Good things happen out of nowhere. Good things happen out of nowhere. If you want to, I'll stay. If you don't, I'll go away. Where I'll go, it's hard to say. Good things happen out of nowhere. 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 There is no end to this road we travel. No conclusion is foregone. Once you define a thing, you lose it, but it keeps you moving on. It keeps you moving on. Thank you so much. Love to you. John Leventhal, Roseanne Cash, you all. God bless you. See you soon. Thank you.